Kenya's biggest conversation enters the second hour, and we'll be discussing Generation Equality's mission to end gender-based violence. But let's begin with the day's proverb from CT Muga.
Mchovya asali, huchovya, hachovi rather, mara moja. Where is my mind this morning?
It's okay, just calm down, CT.
Usa.
Give it a second go.
Right. 1, 2, 3, go. Mchovya asali, hachovi, mara moja.
Which of those words is giving you some difficulty on your mind?
The mchovya na
It's a
hachovi.
Muthui.
Yeah, there's mchovya, then mchovyi. And then this one is mchovya, then this one hachovi. Yeah. But I've gotten the hang of it.
Right. Mchovya asali, hachovi mara moja.
Yes.
In English?
Directly translated is one who dips the finger into honey does not do it only once. This one is cryptic.
It can be.
It can be very cryptic. And it's universal. So take your pick.
Ukichovya asali. Now the assumption here is that you chovya and you lick. You dip and you lick.
Actually, the whole purpose of it, if you dip your finger into a honey pot or into honeycomb, it's specifically so that you can taste the honey. Rarely do you dip your finger into the honey pot or the honeycomb so that you can smear your face with honey. No, rarely. So.
Okay. You agree with all that?
Yes.
Ndu?
Hey man, she's nodding sagely.
She's remembering many things.
Asali,
We have three guests in the show this hour, and one of them is in the studio. Other two are joining us via video link. Yasmin Mohammed, founder and director of Superb CBO, is with us in the studio. Naomi Kilima is a legal officer with CREAW Kenya. She joins us via link. And Florence Machio is regional technical advisor, Population Action International. Good morning, ladies, all of you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation, the Situation Room. We're talking about gender-based violence. We need to end gender-based violence. There's a commitment by our president to end gender-based violence. By which year again, Ndu? 2026?
2020, yes. So,
That we shall have no cases of gender-based violence in 5 years' time. 4. So generation equality is what we'll be discussing. Let's first of all understand the organizations that are represented this morning. Yasmin, you're the founder and director of Superb CBO. What's that?
Yeah. My name is Yasmin Mohammed. I'm born and raised in Kibra, founder and director of Superb. It is a feminist women's rights organization. And our work is around promoting the rights of women and girls in marginalized and underserved communities. It is my pleasure to be here and looking forward to unpack generation equality and its mission towards ending gender-based violence as we commemorate or celebrate the 16 days of activism. Thank you.
Okay, so what does Superb mean?
Superb, it's an acronym that is aligned with our objective, which basically mean we are working towards creating a safe space for women and girls living in underserved communities to be persistent, empowered, resilient, and bold. Yes.
Where? Okay. We'll be talking more about this as we continue the conversation. Naomi Kilima, you're the legal officer at CREAW Kenya. And we were talking and asking each other earlier. We know about CREAW. We know CREAW for very many years. But what does CREAW stand for?
Thank you very much. CREAW stands for Center for Rights, Education and Awareness. We are an NGO that actually works with a feminist organization. We promote women and girls' rights in Kenya by giving them various services, especially to GBV survivors. We give them legal assistance. And we also give psychosocial support, including empowering them to get a livelihood.
Okay. And Florence, Population Action International. Introduce us to the organization.
Well, Population Action International, it's an international NGO based in Washington, D.C., but also serves the region, working through partners. And when I say region, I talk about about 5 African countries. Next year will be 7 African countries. And India. We work towards reproductive health rights, and also we work towards preventing and working with governments to change policy to invest in women's rights. So that's what we do.
Okay, so just coming into the conversation then about Generation Equality campaign, what is this campaign about and what does it aim to achieve, Yasmin?
So with the Generation Equality, actually it started in Beijing, and it was during the 4th Women's World Conference, and the Beijing Declaration Platform for Action launched the Generation Equality with an aim of working towards the rights of women and girls. And looking at the Generation Equality, it's a forum that took place this year in March and June, where Kenya is co-leading in an action coalition gender-based violence. And I believe with the conversation, we'll get to unpack the commitments, because again, working at grassroots level, they are not aware of the commitments and even the Generation Equality Forum. But again, we are really glad of the support we get from Center for Rights, Education and Awareness, because we get to accelerate the conversation at grassroots level.
All right, so then, I mean, there are very many players in these conversations when we're looking at ending gender-based violence, 16 days of activism that is commemorated every year, and hoping that as we get closer and closer to that point where we are saying that gender-based violence then should come to an end across the globe. Where are we? What is the status of gender-based violence in the country today that we are saying, so what are the markers then towards its end? And I guess this is something for all three of you. Maybe we can go with Florence.
All right. Where are we? I want to take it from around 2017, 2018, when women's rights organization, CREAW, and others, came together to really push it down to the policymakers and duty bearers, and talking about a multi-sectoral approach to end GBV. So in 2017, we had a conference where we brought in religious leaders, and we brought in the voices of children who've been violated. And we asked religious leaders, what is your position and what are you going to do to prevent? What are you going to do on the pulpit? Just the way the government is trying to use religious leaders to push the vaccine. In 2018, 2019, we held a vigil, and where we asked the Interior Minister, Machia, and the ODPP, and Mr. Kibicho as well, that women are being killed, the cases are taking long in court. What are you going to do? And the challenge for us was the forensics and the follow-through when it comes to investigations are the ones that fail us when we get to the justice system. And so survivors' cases take forever in court, and then people don't receive justice. What does this mean? It means that perpetrators enjoy a movement in this country. They rape here, they go to Mombasa, they rape, and they're never caught, yet the survivors are left with the scars. And then we also pushed the Minister for Health and said, why aren't we investing in psychologists within our healthcare system? Because the issue of violence, when a woman has been violated, yes, they'll go to court. Yes, probably the perpetrator can go to jail. But the scars left need, regular psychological help, which is costly if you were to look at it, because for me, I could take a year, and maybe Naomi will take 5 years. And so that particular investment needs to come. The other thing we pushed through the counties is, why can't we have safe houses run by states and not by NGOs? So where we are right now is we have one state-run safe house by Makueni County. We just came through last year when we had COVID. This is the county government that beat the bullet and said, we are going to put together a safe house paid for by taxpayers. Others are coming up. Nairobi is coming up. NMS working with the Women Rep and working with the Nairobi County to build a safe house in Nairobi. And the reason we were pushing for state-run is simply because NGOs cannot afford to sustain safe houses. And our taxes need to be able to protect us, especially when when the government has not protected us from being violated. So that's where we are. Then the other thing is Polycare was launched. We now have a system by the police to be able to help a survivor. When I go to the OB place, when somebody is reporting about their chicken, I'm not also reporting about a rape, and the policeman could be insensitive, laugh at you, and that is what stopped people from reporting at the police station. But Polycare means that I will get to a one-stop place where I'll speak to the policeman, I'll speak to somebody who will counsel me, my statement will be taken. I don't have to hope from hospital, then I hope to the police, then I go back again, which is the tedious exercise that a survivor goes through. So that is where we are. Of course, we also have the declaration by the president that we end FGM by 2022, which is one form of GBV. And of course, we have this Kenya commitment to end GBV. That is where we are.
Florence, let me ask you this question. I ask this from a position of ignorance.
Yes.
When we talk about gender-based violence, what's the threshold? At what point is it violence? At what point is it gender-based violence? The lower threshold, the higher threshold? We talk of violation. At what point is it a normal societal engagement? At what point is it violation? Where do you draw the line?
Any violence, there is no threshold of this one is lower and this one is better than the other, this one is worse and this one is less serious.
I'll tell you why I'm asking you the question, because you seem to be referring to physical violence, and I'm going beyond physical violence.
You should have asked us to unpack what GBV is. So gender-based violence encompasses several things. We can start with sexual harassment. It's part of gender-based violence. And it is me using my gender or looking at someone and realizing they are vulnerable and therefore using my power to violate them. In an office scenario, we could say a boss, taking advantage of a junior and trying to violate them. So you can pack that as sexual harassment. When we could go to the home, if my uncle and I'm a child violate me, whether they touch me physically, unwanted touch, or they actually sexually violate me, that is also gender-based violence. When a boy is sodomized by the teacher or by senior, when you go to Form 1 and you're violent, that is also gender-based violence. When there is domestic violence, that is also gender-based violence. It doesn't matter who is doing what, who is the perpetrator. It could be a man, it could be a woman, but it's still under gender-based violence. When I'm in a matatu and somebody gropes me, that is gender-based violence. When I'm walking in the streets and because it is dark, somebody thinks that I should not be walking in the dark, or somebody believes that whatever I'm wearing is not palatable and therefore the punishment I get is being violated, whether it will be physical or sexual penetration or groping, unwanted groping and unwanted advancing, that is gender-based violence. If you go to France, when you catcall a woman, it is form of gender-based violence that it is in their law. So gender-based violence takes all forms and shapes, and what I think we try to focus on mostly is what Naomi will tell you falls under the Sexual Offences Act, which can be prosecuted. And if you look at sexual harassment, it takes a lot to collect evidence because the onus is usually on the victim to show that I was actually sexually harassed. So that, in a nutshell, is gender-based violence.
And where does societal norms that eventually lead to societal pressure and then forms part of the habits and norms that people carry about themselves on a daily basis, where do they fit in?
Well, when you look at when we are, let me use myself, when we are getting married, the patriarchal nature of society, while dowry was put in place for a man to appreciate the family of the girl before when they're getting married, some communities or some people have used the fact that I gave mahari to your family to make me their property. And property means I can do whatever I want with you. If I say I beat you today, I'll beat you. If I say you want to go to work, you want to go to work. If I decide I will hold your ID now that we're getting into an election, and therefore you will not vote, it goes ahead and happens. Again, if you look at FGM, when a girl is circumcised, which is also against the law, it is a precursor to child marriage, which is against the law as well. And so, while it is a culture for initiation, it is a conduit for GBV, because many girls end up getting married young, which is against the law. They end up not going to school, but yet we are trying to perpetuate culture. So some cultural, and our constitution, I think, Naomi, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is clear. Our laws are clear that if there is anything that goes, any culture or any tradition that goes against the law, then that culture is not allowed in this country. And so every time we use culture as a conduit to violate others, then we are also going against the law. So that's the place of culture, if I can use it. Some of the cultures that perpetuate gender-based violence.
Are you happy with that, City?
No, actually, I wasn't seeking happiness in asking my question. The purpose of my asking the question and why I seemed to have this pause for a moment, because I was pausing, because I was looking at how it is habits are formed and what is behind the habits that are formed, which eventually lead to the things that we're saying. When you, for instance, normalize a way in which men treat women, you normalize it. You don't see it as violence, you see it as normal, and yet it is violence, it is a violation, and you are actually causing harm. If you look at what people call hazing or harassment in schools, or the culture where you pick on others, it is considered to be a rites of passage of sorts. But unfortunately, these things grow and become habits, and people grow up with them, and that becomes their norm.
Well, then going off of that, then,
Yes.
Naomi, I think Florence has referred to you a couple of times. And some of these things which have then been extremely normalized in the way, I mean, looking at something like catcalling in the streets of Paris, which is against the law. But then looking at things, and you've mentioned, Florence mentioned, groping somebody in a matatu, for example, that people would laugh off, laugh about and just let it go, or that somebody makes statements about the way in which you're dressed or where you should be at a particular point in time, or that, a young boy who has been sodomized then is not able to speak about it because he's supposed to be coming from a position of strength. Now, if we're looking at the status of GBV and asking where we are in the country, it seems that it looks like a very bad place that we are at, because of this thing that CT has mentioned, that it has been normalized, these actions, and that we don't see it as anything untoward, that we laugh it off. But then it seems as though we're actually much deeper in this thing than we realize, and that it will be much more difficult to get out of by this prescribed date of 2026.
Yes, it is very, very true that we're in a bad place as a country. Because especially that we have normalized most of the things that are termed to be GBV. I think something that Florence was trying to unpack when she was talking about GBV was saying that GBV is basically any discrimination on basis of gender. So because I'm a woman, this is why it's happening to me. Because I'm a man, there's a woman in a position of power, that is why it's happening to me. Any type of evaluation, it might be physical, it might be emotional, it might be psychological, it might be in your finances. So there are different types of gender-based violence. That is finances, physical, sexual. So long as there's discrimination on the basis of gender. The reason why we've normalized some of these things, some of them came in our cultures. Why FGM is such a bad thing right now, and we think that it used to be normal. It used to be a rite of passage for girls in the Kushite community and some of the Bantus community in Kenya. The main reason why it is harmful is because it actually harms the girl's life. It makes the girl's life more difficult. It gives her health complications. That is why there is law preventing it, because it violates one of her fundamental rights, and that is her rights to choose what happens to her body, having the right to proper health. So where he's saying we're normalizing a lot of harmful things is that whatever you're doing, so long as it is discriminating me as a woman, when you grope me, I've not given you consent. I've not given you any authority to touch my body, and you do it, it's a form of violation. You are using your power to make me feel as if I'm worthless. It's just taking away my dignity. So that's why GBV is such a bad thing, because it actually affects people psychologically, making them not being able to be productive in the society, not to realize their actual potential. It makes other people just go numb, and it makes the society not move.
Naomi, when one is a man in this day and age, one has to walk very gingerly when one is discussing this gender topic, because misogyny and the labeling that follow it is usually not far from anything that you say. But I am going to wade right in nonetheless. If you look at the manner in which many African societies were male-dominated, it makes perfect sense that an equal force in trying to balance it and give women a higher position and a balanced position was needed. Affirmative action was needed. However, the balance sometimes is not seen to be there for two reasons. One, people do not like losing positions of advantage, okay? No matter how harmful it is to someone else. But on the other hand, how else do you get to a point where now the victim gets empowered and the person who had been empowered now becomes the victim? And so you have a situation where, because focus was supposed to create a balance, it has tipped. And so the conversation of balancing it now becomes center stage, but yet the momentum was on getting one side balanced. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I sometimes have difficulties determining who is the victim and who is the perpetrator. And I'm going to explain why. A victim somebody who you see as a perpetrator could very well be a victim. He could be a victim or she could be a victim because they've been socialized into going about their life in a certain way. They've been brought up. Around them, they've seen people doing things in a certain way, and that's what they do. So, where do we get off? How do we balance this? Because you want to get this person to understand that this thing that they have been socialized into and normalized is actually wrong. How? I mean, what I'm asking is not an easy thing, but I'm simply saying it's a discussion that goes a lot deeper, and we all participate. Men participate in it, women participate in it.
How to balance it.
How to balance it.
City Muga, Eric Latif, Nduoko with you every weekday morning, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. The conversation this hour is Generation Equality's mission to end gender-based violence. And joining us for this conversation, Florence Machio, Regional Technical Advisor, Population Action International, and Naomi Kilima, who's a legal officer at the Center for Rights Education and Awareness, CREAW Kenya. Joining us in the studio, Yasmin Mohammed, founder and director of what she called a feminist CBO called Superb CBO. So you are working the ground, Yasmin.
Yes.
Just the conversation that CT was raising earlier. How do we balance the gender issue such that we're not focusing a lot on one side and then the other one ends up being a victim, or even the definition of victim, like he said. Some are victim by circumstance because you are socialized this way, you are brought up this way, you're told this is the role of a man, this is the role of a woman, and so you take it up. You're brought up this way. How do you have these conversations in your community as a Superb CBO?
Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like to address the issue of cultural norms first. And these are things that are socially constructed. And some of them are very retrogressive, just as Naomi and Florence have just shared. And us as an organization, what we do is to ensure that we challenge the narrative as well as look for alternatives. Because again, if we are having the harmful practices that are really health hazardous to our women and girls, it means that they'll not live to realize their full potential. So at grassroots level, what we do is to challenge the narratives and talking about victimization and perpetrators. What we do is we usually have a mentorship session whereby we empower women and girls and we don't leave men and boys aside. So what we do is to educate men and boys to be allies and not perpetrators, and empowering women and girls. Because again, you find that the conversation at grassroots is that we are empowering women a lot, and that's not true, because we are living in a society where women are being killed every day. Every day we wake up to the news that there's a woman and her children that have been killed by the husband. And what does it basically mean? Does it mean that we are really like empowered as the society thinks? No. So what we are trying to do is to empower them so that they'll be able to speak out. And if they notice they're in a toxic relationship, they'll be able to stand out and step out of the toxic relationship. And we are not leaving men aside. We convene men as well. And recently we had convening with the men and boys and the Nduthi guys, the boda riders, because again, they are being perceived as perpetrators of violence. Recently we had a case of a girl from Kibera Girls Soccer whereby she was raped and killed and dumped in a river while she was going home after schools were closed. And the incident happened via, or rather through a boda guy. So what we did is convene boda riders and had a discussion around gender-based violence and look at strategies and interventions that we need to put in place so as to ensure that we have the reduction or reduced cases of sexual and gender-based violence. So we educate men as well, City, to just ensure that we prevent these cases from happening.
Let's look at now this recent case that you've just told us. Okay, so you convened boda riders around Kibra to come together and have this conversation.
Yes.
From their reaction, were they also condemning what had happened to the young girl?
Actually, we were very pleased by their response because, again, what we did a value-based activities whereby we let them had the discussion, or rather the dialogue, and we were looking at the hotspots areas in Kibra, and themselves were the one coming up with the reasons as to why, like, most of the women and girls are being sexually abused, from having the vichochoros, in Kibra, from men using or rather consuming substances, and also having violent husbands. And as well, talking of the economic constraints and financial instability, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, which at one point triggered the high rate, or rather high reported cases of sexual and gender-based violence. The responses were good, and actually they were the ones who came up with interventions like what are we going to do to ensure that we are the ones championing to end GBV in Kibra community.
Were they talking about championing ending GBV or ending crime?
They were championing, because the discussion was around gender-based violence, and looking at the root causes, you find also crime is a factor that contributes to sexual and gender-based violence. So looking at the root causes, we are first looking on how we'll be able to address the root causes of GBV, crime being one of the root causes, as well as drugs and also the financial and economic constraints. So we are currently looking on how we'll be able to solve the root causes, or rather the underlying factors that contribute to sexual and gender-based violence.
You know what is actually strange? There is some study that was conducted by the Center for National Crime Center. That's what it's called, NCRC. And among their findings were that more men than women report GBV. Okay? Now,
report GBV.
They come out
as being victims.
Yes,
of GBV.
yes, they report as being victims.
Not on behalf of
No. But you see, when I read it, this is what came to my mind. The fact that someone reports it doesn't necessarily mean that the violence had initially been directed at them. They may very well have started the violence, and then it turned sour, and they ended up at the receiving end of it, so they're the ones who end up reporting it. But if one isn't careful, this discussion can be a chicken and egg discussion. Which came first? And I think it shouldn't be. What it ought to be, I'm going to be completely prescriptive here, is something that we talk about and take it with the seriousness it deserves, to the point where we ask the question, this is what I'm asking you.
Okay.
what steps do you take with our educators and those who are in charge of our curriculum development to ensuring that among the things that we teach our young people is this very thing, so that at a very early age, yes, you may come from a background where you are taught certain things, but you come to school, you are introduced to a new way of looking at the boy, and the boy is taught a new way of looking at the girl, and you are also taught how it is you need to respond to these people and how you need to treat them. Because we are assuming that this will be done at home. Evidently, what's being done at home isn't really being as effective as it could be.
Yeah.
And then there are the silent voices. Those who have been at the receiving end of this gender-based violence, but you never get to hear of them.
Yeah.
The time when you hear is when something atrocious like somebody's hands has been chopped off. That's when you get to hear of it. And yet, prior to this, there was a lot of violence directed at that individual. Mitigating circumstances from an early age.
Yeah.
Indeed. So, I mean, if we're then coming to you, Florence, and asking the question. So, if these conversations are being had, and beyond the conversations, and beyond some of these suggestions and inclusion that is being made, what actions are being put in place to ensure that there's accountability of the implementation of some of these things? Because it does seem that, the conversations have been had for years on end. What are we doing to make sure that there's actually implementation of some of these things that come from these conversations, and accountability of the actors and champions of some of these things to make sure that these things are carried out?
I'll take you back on something. If I just take on from what your co-host was talking about, what are you teaching boys and girls? What are we putting in place to re-educate? Because society has educated us in a certain way, but given the scenario, we need to re-educate ourselves.
Florence, the co-host is called C.T. Munga.
All right, Munga. Yes, so we put together, when Ambassador Amina was the Minister for Education, what we called school-related gender-based violence. And it didn't mean that it is school-related, meaning it will happen in school, but it was just Ambassador Amina trying to see how do we make our schools safe, how do we make sure that the generation that comes up understands and values each other and respects each other in such a way then we are not raising perpetrators and we are not raising victims. And that policy, was going to be beautiful in terms of how we have put the mechanisms in place. But a week before she launched it, she was moved to Ministry of Sports. And since then, we've been trying to get our good professor and that was part of the handing over package that he was given, to implement within schools at least, so that if a child feels unsafe at home, they have a place in school, and there's somebody in school they can talk to, not necessarily a teacher, but a child psychologist who we had also looked at to be able to listen to this child and ensure that these conversations, or rather this child, gets help. But also within the school curricula, have conversations around patriarchy, dismantling patriarchy, understanding what is consent, understanding listening and believing survivors, standing against the rape culture, talking about this and teaching the next generation and on what to do and how to do things differently. So that one, my brothers and my one sister in studio, is the fact it is what has happened. That if we don't have political will, some things will not happen. We will have beautiful policies, we'll have beautiful laws, but we will not have the resources to make it happen. And that's why Generation Equality was pushing around, give us data, do research, and give us data, so that we are speaking from a point of knowledge. We are speaking from a point of saying, okay, so GBV happens, but these are the numbers in terms of boys, these are the numbers in terms of men, these are the numbers in terms of girls, some segregated data that allows us to respond appropriately. That is also why Generation Equality, this commitment, was to push government to put money where their mouths are. Don't have a law, and then you don't have money to make it happen. You don't have police that are trained to ensure that, they are able to investigate. You don't have a forensic lab that ensures we are able to collect forensics and pin down perpetrators. And then you also don't have a school system that is helping learners understand what consent is, and not just imagining that consent is a certain way. And also just ensuring that, hey, you are, on one hand, supporting survivors, but on the other end, you're also helping prevent and break down some norms that are very retrogressive. So that is where we are, and that is the push we keep on having. And that's why these conversations have to continue to be sustained, lest we forget that we have not dealt. If you look at next year, we're getting into an election year, and the WACI report, Chapter 6, talks about sexual violence used as a tool to intimidate women, not to vote, but also to intimidate women from the opposite camp or from the other camp. And yet we are having an election. We have this knowledge, and we're not putting in place structures to ensure that we prevent this kind of violations to happen. So for me, it is our government putting their money where their mouth is and not paying lip service, because we can only do so much as NGOs. The rest is up to the government to do what it needs to do.
Do you think, Florence, that there is a gap between, we can say that there is political will, because the president has spoken very many times about gender-based violence and committed to ending gender-based violence. So from the very top, there is that will. But does that will cascade down to government programs, government budgets?
No. I mean, for me, if you look at, we have a devolved system of government. And if you look at the 47 counties, when I was invited to share during the COVID season, I was invited to share with the Council of Governors, what should they do? Because the cases were escalating, the ODPP had raised an alarm, the CJ then, Justice Maraga, had already raised an alarm, and so people were wondering, what do we do? And when I shared the few points, learning from other countries of what we can do as an immediate thing, the only person who took it as important was one governor out of 47. One. So again, yes, you have political will at the top, but it also has to cascade at the county level. Remember, the county is the one now giving services, certain services to the community. You have the county commissioners. You have the county police commanders. If they don't believe, and I've had instances where I've had to call a county commandant for a case to be moved from that police station to where it's supposed to go. And so we still have a re-education of our police forces. We still have a re-education of our healthcare service providers. We still have a re-education of communities to see that this is a problem, and therefore we need to report, and hatuwezi kumalizia nyumbani where a goat will be exchanged because this is an uncle involved. So there's a lot of re-education in all our agencies to take this as a matter of priority, and therefore once that is done, then finances go in the right place, and the research will show us the same.
Naomi, where would you say that the citizens have a role to play in all of this? Citizens of the country, we're talking about government, we're talking about agencies that have a responsibility. What about the responsibility of citizens?
The first thing I want to state is that I love the way City Munga has been provoking our imagination, because most of the time we think that GBV only affects women, but it also affects men. So our society, both men and women, need to ensure that we actually play our part, and that is, we need to be reporting, and we need to be assisting the people who are actually survivors of gender-based violence. Because one thing, our society is very good at blaming. We blame survivors, we blame victims for anything that happens to them. So, for example, if I am a victim of SGBV, people will start saying she was wearing a short skirt, she was not decently, she's not a woman who goes home at 8 a.m., she's always outside at night. So people are always bringing things. And Generation Equality is aware of this situation. That is why in the commitment in which Kenya is committing, we are really focusing on prevention and response. Prevention and response means that we need to educate ourselves to unlearn those practices that we have normalized. We need to have awareness so that we can add what the law says what is consent? What is allowed? What is not allowed? Because when everyone is reading from the same script, we'll be able to prevent and we'll be able to actually reduce SGBV or even GBV in our community. So as Florence has been stating, we need to really, the research part needs to be done so that we can be able to know, are the laws that we have effective? Are they comprehensive? Are we able to protect each and every person in the community without discrimination? So basically, we need to, as a society, we need to stop victimizing victims. We need to be more sensitive. The media has a big role to play because the media is where people actually see CREAW cha jamii. That's where we know everything about what's happening. So they have a big role to play in educating the people about GBV and what the component of GBV are. So basically, as a community, we need to be aware of what GBV is and how to prevent it. So we need to actually, the government needs now to play its part in educating us about GBV, what needs to be prevented, and the laws that are there that protect victims of GBV. And they should not just stop at there. They should also now start empowering victims. In the generation equality commitment, there's a commitment in which they are stating that there's going to be a survivor fund. The government needs to put their money where their promises are, because the commitments have been there, but we have not seen any budget towards that. So basically, we're just seeing a lot of talk and no action. So that's what I think this community needs to do. We just need to play our part.
Very well put there. Thank you very much, Naomi, for the contribution. I want to thank you very much, ladies, for joining us today for this conversation. Generation Equality campaign is one that needs to be supported, and we welcome you to come back and let's have a continuing conversation on this. Like you said, once we open the conversations, we should not stop. And then we should now see how to follow the conversations up with action. Naomi Kilima is a legal officer at the Center for Rights Education and Awareness, CREAW, Kenya. Florence Machio is a regional technical advisor at Population Action International. And joining us in the studio was Yasmin Mohammed, founder and director for Superb CBO. What's Superb again in full?
Superb is a feminist women's rights organization where we work towards creating a safe space for women and girls living in underserved communities to be persistent, empowered, resilient, and bold.
Okay. To be persistent, empowered, resilient, and bold.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the boldness. Asanteni sana, ladies, for joining us. This is Kenya's biggest conversation.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.